Hey, everybody, this is Tom Salemi of DeviceTalks. Thanks for listening to the DeviceTalks weekly podcast. I'm actually re-recording this intro because I wanted to let you know that we recorded this entire podcast episode, other than this part, prior to the Silicon Valley Bank news breaking. So we're still trying to assess that information. You can get the information that we do have up on Mass Device. Chris Newmarker and his team, Sean Hooley in particular, are reporting on some of the companies that are thought to be exposed. That's information that's being put out by the banks. And we're all talking to people and trying to cobble together a better understanding of what's going on. But this episode mostly is pre-news or is pre-news. So please understand that as you listen. So we would love to understand how you're feeling. So please reach out to us on LinkedIn, shoot us a DM, let us know. A few bits of housekeeping. We're keeping the early bird rate open. It's going to be open until Sunday at 11:59 at this point. I had done that just as kind of a thank you for being a Device Talks podcast listener. I wanted to give you folks a little bit of inside discount and benefits. Because if you're listening on to the podcast on this weekend, you're most likely a subscriber. And I really am truly grateful that you are. So please do join us in Boston, May 10th and 11th. Go to DeviceTalks.com. You can register for that for $395 until the end of Sunday 11:59. While you're there, please register for the upcoming Device Talks Tuesdays. It's being put on by our really good friends, Resonetics. They put on a great Device Talks Tuesday every time they do one. It's very impressive. This one is about microfluidics. It's how microfluidics laminates support the growing market need for diagnostics and point-of-care testing. So please do check that out. And again, that is free. It is informative. You can ask questions. You can build your brand, build your skill set, and you can watch it live or on demand. So go to DeviceTalks.com and register for that. Other than that, we'll have an Intuitive Talks podcast coming out next week as well. And more news coming, some exciting news at Device Talks, actually. So we'll share that next week as well. All right. Well, that is it. Again, I just wanted to explain sort of the timing of this. I'm recording this at 6:19 p.m. on the East Coast. And just want to let you know that this is where we're at. And please keep in touch. Let us know how you're doing. Reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter or email. We'd love to hear how this impacts you. And hopefully next week we'll have a better understanding of where we are, and we'll have some insights here on the Device Talks weekly podcast. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Hey, doing well, Tom. Doing well. I mean, as well.
I like the long pause.
The
long pause. Yeah. How do I answer that question? It's been an interesting week for us.
It's been an interesting week.
A couple of weeks actually.
I was being Minnesotan. I was being very just doing great. That's like
I'm always doing great.
Snow outside. Shoveling the snow. We had heavy snow earlier this week. I'm like, yeah, just doing great. Like,
I hate the heavy snow. But, we had some heavy snow last week, but
like cement.
We've been talking a lot about the last two podcasts. 2 out of 3 podcasts have been focused on the layoffs that have been going on, and you've been doing a great job at Mass Device covering some of the challenges that's facing the medtech industry. I think what's been kind of real for all of us is we spend so much time talking about the companies and the products, and sort of the people have been kind of just an assumed part of this ecosystem, but now we're talking about the people. We're talking about people losing their jobs. We're talking about people in the middle of their careers having to restart. This stuff's real, and you definitely feel for the folks out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just, companies have the, present the reasons for why they're doing things, or don't.
Yeah. But, well, that's an interesting point, and that's something I've been thinking about too. You certainly understand the fiduciary responsibility of executives. I know we're hopping right into it. We're not talking about sausages or anything right now. We're getting right into the conversation.
No. This isn't a sausage week.
This is not a sausage week. But I'd have to think if you're a person who's been part of a massive job reduction, and there's no public acknowledgement of that by the company. I understand why there's not. The companies they have fiduciary responsibility to manage the stock price. They're trying to, manage image. I get it. But I'd have to think would be somewhat. You'd like to have that out there if you were part of the layoff. Like you'd like some sort of public
Yeah.
acknowledgement that this is not because of me. This is not because something I did. It's just the company that's something, and you'd like it to be reported somewhere. At least I think I mean, as I mentioned before.
I mean, it's like companies have been complaining about like quiet quitting,
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
employees might not like quiet layoffs. I mean, that's not
No.
a not good.
And it's going to be interesting to see how. And I was going to say I was part of a layoff too, but it was like 15
Yeah,
people, so you're not going to have a headline about that.
right.
But you got hundreds or thousands of people being laid off in sort of a piecemeal way, I think it would be beneficial to the people affected to have some sort of public acknowledgement. I think what's going to be interesting too.
I
Yeah.
imagine it helps you in like looking for a new
Yeah.
position too, because there's just like no questions. And you're like, yeah, I got, laid off at, the big layoff at like J&J
Yeah.
or Phillips, and they're like, oh, of course, oh yeah, of course, and there's no
Or
like why were you in the, I mean, or how, they're like, of course, I mean, it's not you, it's,
right.
this company made a big layoff, and you were just, like something on a spreadsheet that, got
Right.
crossed off, but.
Or if if you and I hear of a company that's laying off some editorial talent, we might, wow, some of those people available. Let's check it out. Or so and so used to work for that company. Let me
Yeah,
check in with so and so and see what so and so wants to do. And it just opens up opportunities, I think, when there is a public acknowledgement. And it's going to be interesting to see
totally.
with this younger generation of folks who live their life out there on social media more so than you and I, how much of that will remain quiet? Because we do see a lot of posts from a lot of big companies of folks who, hey, I'm no longer at this
Mhm.
company, looking for opportunities. And you and I don't want to build articles around that, but the news is out there. So you may not have the headline with the numbers, with the number of affected in the headlines, but the news is certainly getting out there, as your editorial team has been doing a great job of tracking.
For good or bad, the younger people seem, less afraid,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I think companies should take note of that. You can't just sit around and manage this like you could in the past. You should, just, I mean, I think companies sometimes have to unfortunately do this. And announce it, give the reasoning, like move on.
Yep.
That's,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I mean, I mean, I mean, on one side, I feel good that at Mastiff I've been really working hard to keep on top of the news about what's going on. I think we're helping in the industry. At the same time, it does feel bad to see,
Of course.
so many people doing this work, getting laid off,
Yeah.
to see these like tough times in this industry that I've really, you know, really, come to, I really root for it. I mean, it's a good industry. It's doing some good. So
And I think neither of us is disparaging the companies either. I mean, a lot of this is not
no,
due to their decisions. It's a lot of it is macroeconomic conditions out of their control. No one enjoys laying anyone off. Everyone wants to be growing and growing and growing. So this is by no means, we're not condemning anybody. Just sort
I
of
think
speaking to the truth.
yeah, I mean, it just feels like kind of the feeling I have is that, when the pandemic happened, there was a lot more of like, let's just stick with it and manage our way through this. And, but, now, we're kind of moving to this kind of whatever era, post-pandemic era. And, it's just the economic conditions, there's just some more drag, more expenses. And, these big companies are just, trying to figure out how to navigate through it,
Yeah.
get to a better place.
And Joe Mullings, who we had on last week, he made a point about non-competes and how they shouldn't be part of the severance package process. That has resonated with a lot of folks. Joe took
Yeah.
a video from our interview. He's put it out. It's obviously on our podcast, and it's already that podcast is 2x our normal plays at this time, maybe a little less than 2x, but it's a very popular podcast. So folks should check that out if they haven't heard it yet. Joe is
Totally.
in the room when it happens. He hears a lot of things, and most important, he's not afraid to sort of share his points of view on things. So check that out.
If you right now, the Federal Trade Commission actually is they are considering a rule to ban non-compete clauses, actually. And I just pulled up a news release from the other day where they were saying they were extending the public comment period until April 19th. So you just Google it up, like if you're someone who feels passionately about this in the industry, go on there and file a letter, let them know what this means to you.
Yeah, no, Chris, send me that link and we'll put that in the show notes. So
Totally.
all right. So yeah, keep your eyes obviously on Mass Device. Chris and the team are really closely watching all that's going on, reporting on it more importantly. And if you have some insights or stories to share, reach out to either of us, or more likely Chris,
Tom,
but either of us on LinkedIn. Let us know what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, let's stay on top of this. If stuff like this is going down in your company, yeah, give me a message. I'm happy to, talk to people anonymously, to get something out. I mean, frankly, I don't even need to use somebody as a source if there's like an internal company communication and they can just like, take a picture on their phone and send it to me. I mean, that could be the basis for a news story potentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, if you want to help get the word out, like let me know.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tom, we could launch into I guess we'll launch into the
let me
Newmarker's
just one
Newsmakers.
more thing. I was just thinking, we've been doing the fastball pitches where people can record their pitches for their startups. I was trying to think how DeviceTalks could help. One thing we could do if you're a company that's looking to hire and you want to record a message letting folks know who you're looking for, what type of person you're looking for, and you want that in the podcast, shoot me a DM and I'll send you a link and you just record it right online. Yeah. And we'll just, if we get 3 or 4 of those, we'll have a little bit of classified ad in the podcast. I think that would be
fantastic.
Would be great. So let's do that too. Okay. Yes.
I mean, if I was running a startup, in the medical device space, I mean, if I could find some cash around, I would totally I would look at this as an opportunity. If there could be some really qualified people who could help take my business to the next level. I mean, I'd use this as an opportunity.
And you and I were just talking with someone from a major medical institution, we'll say, who sees this as an opportunity maybe to pick up some great talent to add to their team.
Totally. So there's opportunity out there.
There is.
You can have some hope. There will be hope.
There will be hope.
All right, so I guess let's launch into the Newmarker's Newsmakers.
Sounds great, Chris. Newmarker. What is number 5 on this week's Newmarker's Newsmakers?
Well, number 5 on the list, we've got Medtronic releasing new results around their Pulse Select pulse field ablation system. And when we posted the story on LinkedIn, I mean, we were getting some comments that the results were just even better than people expected. I mean, they were considered like really, really good results around the safety and the efficacy of this system. I think this was one of the top news stories to come out of the ACC 23 WCC conference this week. I'd also have to mention that J&J's Biosense Webster announced that they have started their own clinical trial around their pulse field ablation system. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's it doesn't, pulse field ablation is non-thermal, but I mean it's looking like a pretty hot space. And it looks like it could I mean, I know we had a big panel about it at DeviceTalks Boston, last year, just talking about like all the potential around it that it can, it seems to be good at damaging the cardiac tissue that could be a problem that's causing the AFib without damaging, the tissue around it, so there's just a lot of exciting stuff going on in the space around it, and here's to hoping this is going to really boost how we can treat AFib.
That's people. Great. And we'll have at DeviceTalks Boston this year, we'll have Tim Lasky. He's Vice President of Research and Business Development for Cardiac Ablation Solutions from Medtronic. He'll be giving a presentation there. So make sure you register. And as I mentioned up at the top, because you're listening to this podcast, you get a couple extra days of our early bird rate. I wouldn't wait too long. It's probably going to shut down on Saturday or Sunday. So that would be we're on the 10th. So the 11th, I would register by the 11th and you'll still get in for $395. So,
fantastic.
So check it out. All right, Chris Newmarker, what's number 4 in the Newmarker's Newsmakers?
Well, number 4 on the list, go to Mass Device and there's actually like a whole roundup produced by our associate editor, Sean Hooley, about the biggest cardiac cardiology tech stories to come out of ACC 23 this year. So on top of pulse field ablation, we have news about Abbott's MitraClip and TriClip. We've got some interesting stuff about TAVR, and iRhythm had some exciting news about their ECG. Like when it came to the research around it as well, like at their at the show. So you can get a whole nice roundup of some of the big news to come out of there. You can feel a little FOMO if you didn't make it to ACC 23 WCC. And I'd also have to add we've had AAOS now going on this week, and we've been reporting on ortho device news out of that. And this is Friday. I'm planning to get a roundup of AOS top news out later today, so watch out for that as well. So we're like covering everything coming out of these big conferences.
I've seen Sean's article shared a couple of times on LinkedIn by folks outside of our company, so it's getting a lot of play. And you're going to see what's going on at AOS. That's always a fun conference. I like that one. But all right, let us roll on to number 3, Chris Newmarker.
I jumped the gun a little bit. Actually, that the number 3 story was Biosense Webster. Yeah, so they got the Thermocool Smart Touch SF ablation catheter. But like another interesting thing about it is that this Smart Touch SF, it's a dual ablation. So if you're performing the procedure, you could toggle between pulsed field and radio frequency, and that's a feature that you also see on the tech from Affera, which Medtronic acquired for $1 billion last year. So this really seems like a way that, J&J's Biosense, they're big player in that RF ablation space, and this Thermocool Smart Touch SF really seems to be they're one of the ways they're answering Medtronic and Boston Scientific and such when it comes to this new pulse field ablation space. They definitely seem to be approaching it. We even had Celine Martin, whose like portfolio at J&J includes Biosense, like it's saying at our DeviceTalk event, West event last year, that they definitely they kind of saw the pulse field as kind of like this new chapter in the ablation book, and so they're really looking at like how do we put this in with all of our other offerings so we can really provide this really nice suite of products and services to help doctors treat AFib.
Great stuff. All right, Chris Newmarker, let's roll on to number 2.
Well, number 2 on the list, our MDO managing editor, Jim Hammerand, he helped out a bit on Mass Device, and he caught that there was a lot of stuff publicly available online about what Medtronic's been doing with its early retirement program, and we're reporting just at this point we've got like over 19,000 medical device workers let go just by our own count of Mass Device reporting in the
industry wide. Yep.
Yeah, industry wide. No announcement from Medtronic, but they did talk about significant expense reductions, and I thought Jim did a good job, like just pointing out one way that Medtronic at this point is doing expense reductions, that they just wrapped up a whole early retirement incentives program. It was interesting too in the article, like the way that program was being run, like the areas of the business they were not offering incentives to, which would kind of suggest where Medtronic, no matter what, would not want to cut. Stuff like supply chain, which has been a challenge for them and a lot of companies. They don't want to be letting go of experienced people in supply chain or cybersecurity or whatnot. So it's just some interesting news, and we'll just see what happens. See what happens next over there.
Yeah, no, that'll be one to watch. I've certainly seen a few people on LinkedIn from Medtronic who are no longer there. So, as I said, the reports get out sometimes in drips. So we'll I know your team will keep an eye on that, and we'll see what's to come.
Yeah.
All right. What is the big number 1 news, Chris Newmarker?
Well, number 1 on the list, our reporting kind of like broke this news about Johnson and Johnson letting go of at least 1,000 jobs, including there was a LinkedIn post from a higher up at J&J talking about the company folding its sports medicine business,
Hmm.
into shoulder reconstruction. Just a few days later, we actually, you had Joe Mallings on last week. He was like referring to the surgical robotic cuts a bit at
Hmm.
J&J, and then you can catch state economic development departments, employment departments. The companies need, if you're doing a big layoff, you got to tell the state you're doing it, and that's public record. And just a few days later, there were some notices in California about you know, like nearly 350 surgical robotics jobs that Johnson Johnson cut out in California. So, it's yeah, they're right. There's stuff going on over at J&J with cuts.
Yep. No, well, it was something that we're hearing about, and again, LinkedIn is a place where people let their news be known. So it's something we
Yeah.
saw, but you also got a comment from J&J, uh, not necessarily acknowledging, but not disputing the layoffs or the numbers or
Yeah,
anything like that. Yep.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you do this reporting and, you let the companies know about it, and, they weren't, that was their chance to say no, no mass device.
Yeah.
You're not reporting. I mean, they just said they're constantly assessing ways to be more innovative and competitive. So
And
and then
I'm sorry, as you laid out in the article, or as was laid out, and as we said earlier, just kind of underlining a bit, it's not just a medtech thing. J&J is facing drug patents expiring, which is going to cost them
yeah,
billions. They've got the consumer lawsuits that we've talked about,
yeah,
and just the normal cost of doing business. Interest rates are up, costs are up, supply chain continues to be a problem. So this is it's all part of a bigger problem that medtech
yeah,
companies are facing.
yeah. It's not like it's not just a med tech problem. I'd probably say that across the industry. I mean, there's some layoffs, like, I mean, Philips letting go of thousands of workers.
Yeah,
At least they were like, well, they've got a awful recall, and
yeah,
but I mean, I think a lot of these, it's not exactly medtech specific. I mean, it reflects some of the problems that we see at hospitals, especially in the US. I mean,
right.
yeah, definitely.
We had Henry Sock on last week. I was going to say, and he outlined why hospitals are struggling so much and why they don't even have the bandwidth
Sure.
necessarily to look at new technologies. They're just trying to survive. So they're just trying to staff. They're trying to keep their nurses. They're trying to keep beds open. So there's no time to necessarily worry or consider new technologies, and also
Right.
the cybersecurity risks of bringing in new tech. They're just being overly cautious. So there are
Right.
the term headwinds is overused, but there are a lot of industry headwinds facing medtech. So
Right.
yeah,
I mean, you can just list them all off. Inflation,
yeah,
the strong dollar, making it hard to do business overseas, the supply chain, the all the problems the hospitals are having. Oh, and then China's trying to, if you're doing any business
yep,
in China, China's trying to, lower the prices. The national government is, really like becoming a lot more proactive in their health system on how stuff gets priced. So, I mean, it's just, there's a lot that, companies are trying to work through. And, and it almost seems, unfortunately, if you're a bigger medtech company, then, you have bigger problems
yep,
too, like with this kind of stuff. So, but,
that's right. All right, Chris Newmarker. You'll keep an eye on everything, and folks should again reach out via LinkedIn or if they have your email.
we will
Yep,
stay on top of this. And yes, like, let me know if stuff, always happy to help and hear from people, and, see what we can do to, like, get the news more out across the industry about what's going on.
absolutely. Well, Mike Dineen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about Tioga Cardiovascular. You had some recent news fundraising wise, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But as always, let's start the podcast off focused on you, our guest. What was it that drew you to the medical device industry?
When I was in college, I was actually pre-med and for a long
Uh-huh.
time wanted to go to med school. But I discovered kind of early on that I just didn't want to go through the residency and fellowship training. So I thought I would do something kind of a mixture of science and business because I figured that would be interesting. And I was a biology major. So I didn't know what that meant early on. So I started out in the pharmaceutical sales industry. So I spent 5 years doing that, but really discovered that I wanted to have more hands-on interaction with physicians and ultimately sort of be part of the patient process. And so I was fortunate enough to join a company called DVI, which is Devices for Vascular Intervention. And it was one of the guidance companies. Early on, it was one of the Eli Lilly companies. And so we became kind of a sister company to companies like ACS and everything. And that was coronary atherectomy. It was a John Simpson company, legendary cardiologist. And so that was my first introduction to interventional cardiology. And I loved it. I mean, it was like I had found my home. And that's really what got me into devices.
What was it like back then? Not to be like, tell me about the day back then. But I started covering in 98. I remember 96, There were a lot of the IPOs. And before that, it just seemed like there was, you had John Simpson, you had Tom Fogarty, you just had so much innovation and wide open greenfields to run through. Did it feel that way? Did you feel like you were at the beginning of something big at the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was still kind of at the early ages of cardiology. And interventional cardiology, and it was really exciting. So if you looked at the amount of the venture dollars that went into, of the total percentage of venture dollars, a lot of it went into medical devices. A high percentage of it went into medical devices. And while there's more investment in medical devices now than there was then, the percentage has decreased because tech has really grown kind of dramatically. But it really felt like, you're in the beginning of a startup culture and time. People were really excited about doing new interventions. It was just prior to when the stents came on the scene. And when the stents came on the scene, that was another huge change. And so it was a time of great change in cardiology and a lot of technology innovation. So it was really, really exciting, I think.
And you were working in marketing for a time. You're at Radiant Medical. You were at Boston Scientific with Target Therapeutics. And then you sort of pivoted to entrepreneur in residence at two firms I hadn't heard in a while, but the great firms, 3Arch and Sprout Group. What led you to sort of the venture startup realm?
Yeah. So I had been working at, as you mentioned, in Target Therapeutics. We were just acquired by Boston Scientific. One of our managers, senior VPs at Target, introduced me to one of the partners at 3Arch, Mark Wan. And, at the time, they were starting companies kind of from scratch, kind of similar to what Shifamed does today. Mm-hmm. And it sounded really, really fun. So I'd always dreamed of helping start a company. So they were able to seed us with a small amount of capital. We hired an engineer, and the engineer and myself kind of figured out what that company would look like. And that was just my first taste of the startup life. And it was super exciting. Radiant unfortunately didn't turn out great, but it was an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, what do you draw away from experiences like that? And we don't need to get into the exact outcome, but looking back at times that didn't work out as you hoped, do you draw more lessons from those? It's kind of cliche to say that, but do you draw more lessons from those things that don't work out than from those that do?
I don't know if you draw more lessons. You definitely draw lessons, that's for sure. I think the thing about it is that you have to be really careful when you're going into a white space. And I think Radiant went into really a type of medicine and a type of therapy that had not been done before in medical devices. And that's always high risk. And you always have to take that into consideration when you're entering a new space or starting a company. And, our case, we started out trying to do hypothermia for stroke. Stroke is obviously, it's a very big and important thing to solve. Solving it with hypothermia is a really kind of revolutionary concept that's kind of laden with clinical outcomes and everything. So I think that was more my takeaway than anything else, is like, be careful when you're stepping into a new type of medical device. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but you have to really take that into consideration.
Do you think that's more the case now than it was before, that healthcare is even more resistant to technology coming into places where it wasn't? Or is it penetrated everywhere that there are no more sort of untapped areas?
No, I think there definitely are. I mean, I think there's plenty of things to be untapped, but it's just a different type of risk when you enter a new type of device. And it's different type of risks that we take at Shifamed, for example. We really like to go into areas where the clinical outcomes are relatively understood. And so we try to make better devices and solve clinical needs with better devices. So I actually think that the bigger home runs are in these kind of white spaces, these areas where, you can really change medicine dramatically with a new type of treatment. But it's just that becomes a little bit more of a basic science undertaking than sometimes is, you have to just take that into consideration when you start a company.
Interesting. And I'm fast forwarding a little bit. I see you were VP Development of Director of Clinical Research at Covidien, but Maya Medical is mentioned, and that's another name I hadn't heard in a while. Yeah. So you were in the early days of rental innovation when you were part of the build up before the somewhat sudden crash.
Yeah, that was a really exciting time. So that was my first time that I had worked with Shifamed and with Amr Salahia, who's the founder of Shifamed. We met through a mutual friend, and we started working actually in his house. And this is kind of how my introduction to Shifamed. So literally I would show up every morning and work out of the kitchen. And then we had 15 or 20 people working out of the house until the neighbors complained and we actually had to move out of the house. So that was
those damn entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So it's a typical set. It was like a complete Silicon Valley experience kind of doing this. And I really relished those times, and they were really fun and interesting and stressful times, actually.
I'm a renal innovation kind of fanboy. I remember the build up, and I remember the disappointing news, Simplicity trial, and now we're seeing it sort of come back up again. But I remember all those companies that sort of shuttered their renal innovation programs, all but a couple. That seemed like an unusual experience to me. How was that for you? And it must have been disappointing because there was a lot of hope and promise behind everyone who was undertaking renal innovation.
Yeah. And I think this kind of points out to what I was mentioning before. Like whenever you enter a new therapeutic area with a new type of technology, there's a lot of risk. And I think the early trials for renal denervation, I think, were solidly run trials. And I think as the subsequent trials came on, they expanded the therapy, and I think it became a little bit kind of less controlled or whatnot. And I think renal denervation is real. It works. I think it's just a matter of designing the right trial, designing the right therapy. And I think that's what we're seeing today. So yeah. I'm glad to see it come back.
Maybe you can fix me, Mike. I keep switching between renal and renal. Should I go with renal? Is renal the right way?
I have no idea. I always say renal, but no idea.
At least you're consistent. Let's jump ahead to Shifamed. You've mentioned it a few times. You're an executive residence there in 2017. I know I've talked to a few folks there in recent years, and I'm hoping to get them involved with our West meeting, which is coming in October. Tell us a bit how Shifamed works. Incubators are sort of come and gone, but some have really stuck around, and Shifamed is one of those. And I don't know if incubator is the right term. I don't want to upset anybody. I know people sometimes are sensitive about what you call their organizations.
Yeah, I think Shifamed's a really unique place, and it's a super exciting place. I'm really privileged to have come upon it. As I mentioned, I met Amr Salahia about 10 years ago, started working with him at Maya. But the way Shifamed works is that Amr basically starts a company without knowing what it's going to do and funds it with a small amount of capital. Then a small team, usually a business-oriented person and a technology-oriented person, get together and start to look at clinical needs. And it could be anything. It could be in cardiology. It could be in ophthalmology, although most of our companies are cardiology and ophthalmology focused. We look at clinical needs and then come up with devices. So we don't typically in-license technology. We actually come up with the technology ourselves. So once that process has been completed, we have a clinical need identified, we have a solution identified, and we've done some initial work from a prototype standpoint. Then we go and we fund the companies with sort of venture capital, normal venture capital channels. And we have several partners that we work with, TCP and Cormorant Capital, that end up being our kind of foundational investors, and a number of smaller investors as well that are also quite important to what we're doing, like AMed Ventures and whatnot. But that's kind of how we function. And so at any given time, there's a new company being formed. Amr is a prolific entrepreneur. He loves to start new companies. It's in his blood, it's in his DNA. And it's also what we all like to do. So it's a great environment for that. So now Shifamed has 6 actively funded companies, 2 more that are kind of in the wings waiting to be sort of go on to the next level. And all the companies are pretty close to one another. So we're within walking distance to one another. So there's ample opportunity for collaboration. You have questions, you want to brainstorm with somebody. There's not a lot of collaboration on the technical teams, but if there's a technical issue that someone runs into, there's always somebody that you can kind of call up and ask for an opinion about through. So it's a really interesting and unique environment.
And you're in an office park, so the neighbors aren't complaining about you, which is great.
Exactly. So now we have our own offices. That's one of the things that's changed so much about Shifamed. We start out in Amr was running 3 companies out of his house. It's really kind of a special and unique thing. It doesn't happen in many parts of the world. And now we're running 6 companies, and they're much more sort of established, and each of them have their own offices. So it's been really, really exciting to be part of that.
Correct me if I misheard. So you're starting the companies before you're identifying the products, and sort of then you're building the companies around the problem and then working on the products?
Yeah. So typically the way it works is that an entity will be formed, call it NewCo 5 or NewCo 8 or whatever you want to call it. with some capital and no idea what it's going to work on. And then usually 1 to 3 individuals will start working on a problem and say, hey, like in our case, we're going to look at mitral valve disease. What can we do there? And you get a small team together, you talk to physicians, you understand the clinical needs, you understand where the gaps are. And then it usually takes somewhere between 6 and sometimes as long as 18 months to figure this out. And then once you file that IP and have done some prototypes, then you go ahead and really start the company and raise real money.
So have there been instances where a solution or product hasn't been identified and things have been shut down? And I wonder, what is it like? When do you know you've exhausted every avenue when you're kind of going into the space with an objective but no clear path in mind?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I think it's those types of questions are core to what we end up having to decide. So in the case of Tioga, for example, the predecessor organization was actually formed back in 2013, I think it was. And Shifamed, the entity, looked at several different spaces before we decided to go forward as Tioga into the mitral valve space. So a lot of times these entities exist and they're just a vehicle for exploring innovation and exploring new spaces. So as we go through that process, it becomes apparent usually within 3 months. Sometimes it takes as long as 9 months if you have something. And sometimes you go down a path and then you discover that you don't have a good device solution, or you don't have an IP sort of angle, or you don't have, really a commercial exit identified, or that the acquirers are not sort of interested in the space, or whatever it is. It could be some combination of all those things. And you end up killing the concept before it gets to the real funding stage. So that happens all the time at Shifamed. So we start things, look at spaces, go back, and then then go down another path. And that happened several times in the predecessor company for Tioga before we got really excited about structural heart and the mitral valve. And that was before I was even at Tioga. So I was at Kalila at the time. Yeah.
So let's talk about, we've talked about process, and I could keep talking about it because I just love the entrepreneur story and the innovative process. But tell us about Tioga Cardiovascular. We understand what you set out to do. You have an approach. What are you doing?
So I had just left Kalila / Abbott / Terumo. I think, as you mentioned before, we were acquired by Abbott. Abbott had to sell us because of they purchased St. Jude. And
actually, I don't think we covered that part. I think we were doing that before. So yeah. So how did you talk a bit about that, if you'd like, fill that out?
Yeah. So after Maya Medical, Amr asked me to run Kalila Medical, which is a electrophysiology sheath company. So it was a competitor to the St. Jude Agilis. So we got that approved, got it into humans, sold it to Abbott in 2016. And a few months after the Abbott acquisition, Abbott announced that it was acquiring St. Jude Medical. And so that was exciting, but it meant that given the size of the transaction, that it had to go through FTC review. And one of the things that the FTC found was that they mandated that several of the businesses, including Kalila, be divested.
Oh, wow.
So we were divested to Terumo, and Terumo picked us up in early 2017. We still had some milestones to meet. So I stayed on with Terumo for a while. And then once we had met all our milestones with the second generation product, I took a bit of time off, 4 or 5 months off.
Nice.
And then came back to Shifamed, and we started looking at forming companies again. And this was right after Amr had sold Apama Medical to Boston Scientific, and he was looking to start something new. So we started looking at different things to start. And, we looked at probably a good dozen, maybe 18 different sort of areas and concepts to start. And in late 2018, we had met Azim Latib, one of our very close advisors, a structural cardiologist from Italy and now from New York City. And he really encouraged us to come up with a better mitral valve solution. He had mentioned to us that he didn't feel like there was that there were still massive clinical needs in TMVR. And it would be a very noble thing and an important thing for Shifamed to pursue as a TMVR company. So Amr, having started a company before called Sadr Medical, knew something about the valve space. And so we all decided to start a mitral valve concept. So we started out with a small team, like I mentioned before. We had a small group of engineers, and we started thinking, brainstorming, talking to physicians, including Azim, and coming up with what we thought was going to be a better way of doing the mitral valve. And we figured all that out in sort of late 2018, early 2019, and then funded the company through a Series A led by TCP in April 2019. And that's really kind of how we got our start. And that was a genesis. Yeah.
What field are you entering? Talk about the existing products out there currently that are being used.
I think a lot of people know that TMVR is a quite a crowded space, but I think, without getting overly technical, because we can talk for hours about TMVR, I like to boil it down to three things when it comes to TMVR. One is the French size and the size of the introducer that goes into the body. Of course, it has to be transeptal. That sort of goes without saying, but many of the introducer sizes are still quite large. And we are shooting for a less than 30 French system. Like at the end of the year, we'll be at 28 French. And this is a true OD. So number one, that's a big and important unmet need. It means less vascular complications, less issues at the septum, et cetera. Number two is ease of use. And ease of use is a really hard to define thing, but many of these procedures are famously complicated. And so we're trying to utilize existing muscle memory, if you will, whether it be like a procedure like a mitral clip or whatnot, to do our procedure. So we've really are focused on ease of use. And the number three is LVOT obstruction. So the LVOT is the left ventricular outflow tract. And it's basically the mitral valve sits right next to the aortic valve. And if you have a big, bulky mitral valve in that space, you can actually block the blood from leaving the body, or leaving the heart, rather. So from a clinical need standpoint, that means that you have to make a shorter valve or a more compact valve mostly, and to keep the valve out of that space. And so those are the three things that we're focused on. I mean, there's a few others as well, but again, those are the three major things that we're focused on that I think differentiate us from the competition.
And how have you been able to sort of come to this, to be able to develop something that is different than what's available? What's gone on inside engineering wise to allow this to happen?
Well, I think it's continual pushing of, taking a look at the clinical needs and making sure that we set a high bar for ourselves. So, when it comes to introducer size, there's a lot of engineering that goes into making the valve be able to withstand being crimped down to that small diameter, as well as be delivered through this small catheter. So we mandate a kind of a high bar for our engineers in terms of the clinical need. And it would be easy to say, oh, we're going to stop at 34 French or 35 French. But I think, everybody on the team is really committed to delivering the product that they think is going to be competitive in the marketplace. So I think it's making sure that we maintain a high technical clinical standard and that we never forget the clinical needs that really were part of the founding of the company.
So how does your smaller delivery system and the smaller sizes overall, if you have approval, who would you be able to treat that currently is not treatable?
Yeah, we don't have approval. So we're still waiting to do our first in man. So we're getting very close to doing our first in human. So I would say from a patient access standpoint, the biggest effect of our approach should be the less LVOT obstruction. Because if you look at exclusion criteria for many of the TMVR trials today, and there's a few of them that are going on, LVOT obstruction, it's screened out before the patients actually get the device because they can look at a CT scan and predict if there's going to be an obstruction here. So it's a major exclusion for many of these competitive designs. And so the design imperative that comes from that means that you need a smaller and a more centrally mounted valve. And that's what we've done. So I don't think you can eliminate LVOT obstruction.
Yeah.
That's very, very difficult, but I think you can minimize it. And that's what when I would think about patient access, I think about LVOT obstruction.
Let's talk about the business side. You recently, last month, February 9th, announced the closing of a Series C, $30 million. How much have you raised total, including that round?
So we've raised $75 million in venture money, and then we had another $2.5 million in seed money from the preceding the company start. So 77 total. For
a Series C, I mean, it's on the higher end for sure. Is this an expensive space to run a company? And I imagine it must be because of the testing.
It is. It is. Yeah. I mean, there's no sort of small or easy way to do a valve. And I'm sure some of the listeners who have been involved in the structural heart space know the challenges of it. But I think the structural reliability alone of the valve itself and the implant itself is a massive undertaking and a big project. So not only do you have the implants that you have to develop and all the testing and durability testing you have to do on the implant, but you also have the delivery system. And there's a lot of components to the delivery system. So it's not just a matter of making one delivery catheter. There are actually several catheters that work together in tandem. So you're really making a family of devices and you're actually developing a procedure, which is also really unique, at least from what I've been involved with previously, is that you have to develop the procedure around the use of the devices. So, but going back to the implant side, I think we've had probably almost 30 different iterations of the valve since we started. Literally, we've gone until recently when we froze the design, we were continually changing it and optimizing it for stress and fatigue and for packability and for durability and for minimizing PVL and all the things that are important in humans. It's taken a lot of iterations to get to where we are today. And that's expensive. That really is. So.
And I want to learn how the money will be used, but let's just talk for a moment about the fundraising process itself. How did that come together for you? What is the market like for those outside trying to raise capital, and what are some secrets you can share, some hacks for raising $30 million Series C?
Well, the secret is to be part of Shifamed. So that's the short of it. But I think this is a famously difficult time to raise money for any company, even medical device companies, but all companies. We are extremely fortunate to have a group of really committed and resolute investors at Shifamed, including TCP and Cormorant and AMED and a couple of others as well. Because these firms invest kind of across the board, they're really committed to all the different companies that have come out of Shifamed. And so we've been really fortunate to be able to raise money in this time. And I think, that just goes to the ecosystem, to Shifamed ecosystem, and to our investors. We're really grateful for it.
And how long do you anticipate this capital will last, or what sort of milestones are you hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah, so this money will last us to the third quarter of next year, to the third quarter of 2024. And our objectives are to obviously get into humans with a 28 French system, which we're very close to doing, and then to be an early feasibility study in the United States with the device. So we've already begun engaging with the FDA, and that's a very long and involved process, but it's one that we're definitely well prepared for.
Do you have a sense of how big the trials will need to be and what they're going to look like? Or is that too early for that?
Yeah, so I mean, the EFS trial tends to be on the smaller side. I don't have a specific number for you. And then obviously the pivotal trials are quite large. And I don't have a specific number for that. But I think if you look at the existing trials that are out there, they're in the hundreds or even lower thousands of patients. A lot of it depends on what you're looking for the indication, but that's still ways off for us.
Okay, great. Anything I'm not asking about that people should know about Tioga?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are, it's a fantastic team. We've really been able to make a lot of progress in the last 6 to 12 months, and we're getting very close to human use. So I think that there's going to be a lot of exciting news coming out in the next few months, next 6 to 12 months for Tioga. So it's a big time for us. We are very resolute and committed to reducing mitral regurgitation. There's some technologies out there on the repair side that work pretty well, but still leave residual mitral regurgitation. And as a TMVR company, we believe that no MR is good MR. So that's really what the mantra is of the company, because we believe ultimately that's going to be better for patients is to completely reduce MR. That really is what we're focused on.
Fantastic. Well, I love a good startup story. Thanks for sharing yours and it being on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right, Chris Newmarker, that is a wrap. Where can, once again, folks find you on social media?
Hey, the best place is LinkedIn. Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker.
Absolutely. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Tom, Salemi. I am on Twitter again, sort of at MedTech Tom. And I'm on Instagram, but MedTech Tom, but still not really doing that very much. But anyway, please let folks know about this podcast. Chris, what do we ask folks to do so kindly?
Hey, you got to follow, subscribe.
Right. Follow, and or subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network. You'll get this podcast every week. You'll get Stryker Talks podcasts. You'll get Intuitive Talks podcasts. And soon you'll get your Boston Scientific Talks podcast. We're hoping to launch that. We will launch that later this month. And of course, subscribe separately to Medtronic Talks. They have their own channel. All are available on every podcast application. And it's a great way to keep track of these companies and to understand what they're working on and possibly, what opportunities are out there for the future where folks may be looking to expand. So a
whole wealth of information, a smorgasbord of information. But the one thing you won't find there is pumpkin sausages.
No, you will not.
See there. I worked at that. Gotta work at it once, Tom.
And we'll be back to in-person meetings. Well, we'll be back to Device Talks Boston, May 10th and 11th. Once again, if you are listening to this on the 10th or 11th of March, you still have time to get our early bird rate. I asked our great folks in marketing to keep that door open for a couple more days, so you'll get in for $395, which is $300 off the full registration price, which will kick in immediately after. So it's going to be a great couple of days. As I mentioned at the top, we're well ahead of last year in terms of registration. So it's going to be a busy.
I am excited.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Yeah,
looking forward to Boston. It's going to be great.
Great networking opportunity. We'll have our robotics meetings. We'll have a robotics job fair. So lots of great stuff going on. So don't miss the opportunity to go to DeviceTalks.com.
The only thing better in the northern U.S. than seeing a robin in a tree this time of year is being an early bird.
You have these sayings. You're very folksy, Chris Newmarker. It's like doing a podcast with Will Rogers. It's great.
I kind of grew up in a folksy place.
All right. Well, that is a wrap. Don't forget Device Talks Tuesdays coming up 4:00 on Tuesday. Make sure you go to DeviceTalks.com for information about that and register for that. It's free. Great way to build your brand, to build your knowledge. And I'll talk to you then. All right, Chris Newmarker. Thanks for doing what you do.
Hey, you too, Simon. Yeah, take care, everybody.